Hello and welcome to the D
and A of Home Interiors, the podcast which is all about empowering you to make confident interior and furnishing decisions for your home. I'm Audrey, founder of Audrey Whelan Interior Design.
And I'm Deirdre, founder of youfurnish.com, such 100 plus furniture retailers on one website. The DNA of Home Interiors is proudly sponsored by checkatrade.com. If you need help with your next home improvement project, you can search from over 39,000 recommended, vetted and monitored trades on checkatrade.com. Today, Audrey and I are going to be covering everything around interior design myths. Are all those things that you've heard fact, or are they just an old wives' tale? Audrey, tell us more.
Yeah, so this is something that crops up so much in conversation for me, whether it be with clients or people who come to my workshops or even just chit chats I have with sort of, family and friends and neighbours about updates they're doing in their home. And what I find is so often people will say, oh no, well, I can't do this, or somebody told me I can't put those colours together, or whatever it might be. And I think, hang on, who told you this and why can you not do that? So I love nothing better than lifting these grey clouds hanging over somebody's home and their decision making and helping them to see outside the box and get really creative with their ideas rather than holding back based on some kind of unsolicited advice from somebody.
And it's really funny because, Audrey, when I started thinking about this, one of the examples I gave you is that I was told you should paint all your rooms the same colour if you live in a small home. And I live in a small apartment. There's literally, a main living room and two bedrooms and a bit of a corridor in between. So, one of my mum's friends, I got the advice relayed on to me, you should paint in the same colour to make it feel as big and to have that consistency. It'll make it feel much bigger. So I duly did what I was told and I've painted it all grey. But is this a myth?
Yes. That is absolutely a myth, I would say. But funny enough, that is one of the top myths I hear all the time. So it's usually a question from people who say, oh, yes, somebody has said to me, just like you're saying, that this is the best approach. And I would think, well, that's just not a good enough reason. I mean, there might be reasons why you genuinely want to do that, but I don't see that it should be a rule that, it's the only way. Some people really love to have different rooms that have, different personality that they can get by painting them in different colours. But, if somebody really wants to unify the space, it's not the only way. I mean, you can also perhaps have like the same flooring going through a number of rooms, but you might choose to paint the walls differently. But you may also inject a sort of a colour palette, maybe more in terms of accent colours or accessories that you can run through the room. So it might be that, you quite like red and you've got little hints of red that appear maybe in some artwork, in some maybe cushions or lampshades, but not necessarily on the same items, in every room. So there's lots and lots of ways that you can kind of unify your space. But I think, when people are told you must paint all the walls the same colour to achieve this, it is a bit of a sweeping statement and definitely should be unpicked a bit further, I think.
Well, there you go. I know that one now. And luckily, I've added an odd design wall. So I've managed to get a bit of a splash of colour. But yes, it's really interesting when you hear these things. And one thing I constantly hear is around colour choices. So pink and red don't go. Blue and green should never be seen. Are these rules, or how should we think about these sort of elements?
Yeah, well, this is another one that crops up all the time in conversation, I find. So yeah, there's certain kind of, I suppose, rules that people maybe are going by, which were maybe conceived many, many years ago. Like there was definitely a time when people felt that sort of bright reds and bright pinks and oranges, for example, that set of three colours that, you shouldn't really mix them or even two out of the three of them together. They were seen as clashing colours, like say pink and red. But thankfully, I feel, we've really moved away from that. And, there's great examples now of, items where you see these colours being brought together. And of course, if you were to paint maybe one wall in a magenta and one wall in a bright red, yes, I do think that is going to be too OTT for most people anyway. But when we talk about bringing these colours together, it can be in really small doses. And like I said earlier about sort of the common thread maybe amongst your rooms being brought in through those smaller pieces such as cushions or artwork or accessories. That's also the way that you can bring in elements of these non-traditional colours, if you like, together and create something that's quite punchy but without being too overpowering. So again, I would say when people say, oh, you can't put those colours together, I would think, well, that is another example of a big sweeping statement in my mind, because it's like, well, are we talking about painting the whole rooms in these colours, or are we talking about bringing in smaller amounts of them? So that's what really, can veer the look one way or the other.
It's really interesting because I saw what I think is a fabulous pink and orange cushion. Now, if you had said that to me, I'd be like, oh my gosh, that's terrible. You could never put those colours together. And it's so fun and vibrant. And I just looked at it and I thought, wow, this is great design, even though logically I would have thought this shouldn't work.
Yeah, no, that's such a good example. I've seen, more and more of those colours actually appearing together. And I think, it's a great way to add a bit of fun as well into, your home, which I think after this past year and a bit, I think we all deserve a bit of that.
Indeed, something a little bit naughty about going against what you're told are the rules, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So speaking of colours, one bit of feedback that I've always been given, that if you're a north-facing room or a room that doesn't get very much light, you should always paint that in a very bright colour because of the fact it won't get much light. How should we think about that?
Yeah, so I would say this is another myth because that rule to me, if it is safe to say it's a rule, does not always apply. But this is one of these queries that people ask me so much. And it might be that I go and look around somebody's house and they instantly say, oh, well, this room needs to stay white because it doesn't get much light or it faces the wrong way, it doesn't get any sun. And my first question will be, well, what is this room being used for? And if somebody says, well, it's just, a TV room, I say, well, does it get used during the day? Oh, no, not at all, really. It's more of an evening place, with the curtains closed. And then I think, well, why worry about the light then? If it is used in the evening predominantly, why not make the most of kind of how this room naturally is and kind of embrace that darker kind of sense? So maybe go for a deeper shade on the walls, make it really cozy, enhance it with some great lighting, sort of mood lighting low down as well as the ceiling. And then, you don't sort of have this kind of power struggle with it, if you like, where you're trying to make it something that it never really can be. And of course, the danger in trying so hard to make a room bright that just isn't, is that you end up with quite a clinical space a lot of the time, particularly if you've got sort of whitish walls that are essentially a cold colour and you're not getting any warm sunlight in or much of it anyway. That it ends up sometimes then just being a room that people say, I don't even enjoy sitting in here and I'm not sure why. So I just think, well, that's a complete kind of waste of space. So you're better off to have something kind of cozy and comfortable, even if it does mean kind of going down that deeper route. So I'd say the starting point on that shouldn't be sort of what you should or shouldn't do. It should be looking at the use of the room. And if you genuinely feel that, you're not using it a lot in those, brighter times of the day and trying to enhance that, then I think, just embracing it and going with something cozier is definitely the way to go.
I suppose with all of these things, like, where do they arise from? Is it just like, old tales that just get passed down continually around these myths, or is it changing preferences? What are your thoughts? I suppose
no, it's something I'm quite fascinated about, to be honest, because, I've had some workshop sessions like with groups of people where one or two people will sort of comment on these, a particular example, like we've said, whether it's, oh, but I can't have these colors together, or I can't have these patterns together. And then when I question why not, then somebody else will kind of giggle and say, oh, I've always thought that too, and it becomes a sort of a thing that pretty much everybody has experienced, somebody telling them, oh no, you can't do this, but it's like nobody's really investigated, well, why can't I, or sort of risen up to the challenge. So I wonder if it comes from sort of, when people maybe don't feel very confident about their decision making, or it's their first time round to do something. And I guess like anything, you're kind of asking and chatting about it because it's really on your mind. But of course, the people you're chatting to aren't necessarily the kind of, the experts, let's say. And also because, every decision is should really be tailored to the specific property, and also, what you like and don't like. So it's probably quite unlikely that somebody can just state off the cuff without really thinking about it, the exact right solution. So chances are they're applying their solution that either they were happy with or worked in their particular circumstances, So I think we do need to be taking all this with a pinch of salt.
So it's not just colours, Audrey, as well. And one thing that I have in my main living area is I wanted to go with copper. Copper was trending. I thought it was beautiful. So I have a copper clock. I've brought copper into the pots and pans that I bought. And then I fell in love with a gold lamp. And not only that, but it's a barometer where it tells you the weather, etc. It was the one item that I actually allowed Ray to bring in when he moved in, because it's quite in keeping. We're close to the river, so it sort of has that a bit of a nautical theme about it. So I now have copper coexisting with gold, even though I would have always thought this was a huge no-no.
Yes, this is another really popular query I get. Even to the extent where some people feel obliged to stick to the type of metal they have, say, on their sockets and switches and their door handles. So in a lot of cases, these might all be chrome. So then if I'm suggesting like a copper lamp or, a brass side table or something, often people will say, oh, but gosh, all my sockets and handles are chrome, so I think I better stick with chrome. And
I've actually got chrome handles now that I look around.
Okay.
And I've never even noticed that. And I've clearly got my copper and I'm gold that I'm conscious of.
Yes, yeah.
But I do have all this copper, or this chrome.
So you've actually got triple metal going on, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But I can remember a time where people were tending to be more conservative around this. And, even as a designer, I suppose that we would have maybe aligned things more in terms of, stick with the one metal. But I think what's happened is that, back then, chrome and stainless steel, sort of brushed steel, so all the silvery kind of metals tended to be the predominant ones, and brass was seen as quite sort of old-fashioned. But brass really made a comeback then over the last few years. So both in home furnishings, also in jewellery as well. I mean, I can remember, certainly sort of 11 years ago when I got married, there's no way I would have had gold, let's say yellow gold ring. But now I see the most amazing rings like that. So I think, the same with interiors. We've seen a lot more brass. I absolutely love it, I have to say, brass and copper, because the one of the big advantages over the silver metals is that they're a lot warmer. So if you've got quite a bit of sort of chrome or stainless steel, silver around the place in your metals, so, whether it's a floor lamp, maybe side table legs, and some other accessories, and, in the kitchen, you'll often have quite a bit of chrome or stainless steel. It can all be quite like reflective and quite cold. So I think warming it up with the mix of metals is really good. And I think since more of these things like the brass and the copper items became sort of available in terms of freestanding home accessories and lighting, I think people have kind of embraced the mix more, and I think it's really positive.
Yeah, it's interesting when you say it, because I'm now looking around my living room, and actually the copper clock in particular, it has this real sort of feeling of warmth, and it's raining today, so it feels quite miserable. But yet there's just a bit of a glow off that.
Yeah. The pinky tones, because essentially copper's pink and brass is like a yellowy orangey colour. And both of those shades, are very warm anyway. And the other thing I'd just say about metals is, not to forget that it's not just the colour difference, but also you can have a different finish. So like I was saying about kind of chrome or maybe brushed steel. So the brushed steel would be like a matte finish. And then the chrome would be like shiny silver. And so just the same with brass, you sometimes see items in like a brushed brass or a polished brass, and the same with copper. So it can be quite nice as well if you're mixing materials. If you do have the choice for maybe a copper item, for example, to be maybe matte, and then a brass item to be shiny, you get that additional kind of difference. So you don't have as many like high reflective surfaces, but you can kind of mix it up a bit that way as well.
Quick shout out for our sponsor, checkatrade.com. Search recommended tradespeople online with checkatrade.com.
Now, the next one that we have, it's I feel like we're just going step by step from colors to your metals. So my next one is, can you guess, Audrey? Around patterns.
Oh yeah, pattern, one of my favorite topics. Yeah.
So there's so many patterns out there, from stripes, polka dots, curves, the trying to think of the curvature one. Is it herringbone is the...
Oh, so there's like herringbone patterns and chevron patterns. There's a lot of them around.
Ones. Yeah. They're the ones I'm thinking of.
Yeah.
And, can you have all of these? Is it going to be too busy? Is it that you need, if your stripes, everything is stripes, if your dots, everything is dots, curves, straight lines? How do we mix them up? Think about that.
So I love mixing them up. So I'd say, better to mix in general than, sort of having too much the same. I do appreciate, like, often people find it kind of challenging to decide, how to mix patterns together. So a few kind of rules of thumb I would say are like, having different scales of pattern. So when people say, oh, you can't mix patterns, because they'll clash, that again, I would say is kind of a myth, especially just to say it like that, like another kind of sweeping statement, because, what does tend to clash and feel a bit uncomfortable to look at is if you have too many busy patterns, maybe of the same scale, but different to each other. But if you start to differentiate between the scale of the pattern, so for example, if you had to make a decision on curtains and cushions and a rug, for example, you could decide that your curtains are going to have quite a large scale pattern. So maybe it is a floral pattern. So it's quite sort of organic and fluid, but very large in its kind of scale and proportion. And then perhaps your rug then is a chevron or a herringbone type pattern. So it's more geometric. So it's like zigzag, but it's like a medium scale pattern. So it's a bit tighter, in its repeated, shape and pattern than the curtains. And then, for your cushions then, maybe you go with like a stripe or a polka dot or something, which is like a little bit geometric, but not as much as the rug, but gives you a different element, but it's quite simplistic in its form as well. So whereas the floral of the curtain might be quite busy, but then you're not sort of forcing that against another kind of hectic sort of organic pattern. So it's thinking about the different scales of the pattern, but then also simultaneously thinking about the different types of the pattern. So the geometrics and the more fluid ones, and how you can combine those together in a way that they don't feel overwhelming. And then also colour is one to consider. So, you could have a common thread that runs, pardon the pun, kind of through each, but, for example, a small bit of red or something that appears in each one or in 2 out of the 3. You can also use contrast to help it work. So maybe the chevron rug is black and white, but then you've got colour in the other 2 patterns, and that can also work very well in unison. So yeah, definitely a myth to say that you can't have patterns together in the room.
Clashing patterns, it's okay. I think the nice thing about it though is that, ultimately there is rules, but rules are meant to be broken. And it's really about subjectivity rather than objectivity. So whatever you want, you should have. And if it brings you joy, then by all means go ahead. And all these old myths, well, actually they're not rules to live by anymore.
No, exactly. And what one person might want to restrict themselves on shouldn't be what somebody else then feels they have to restrict themselves on just because, they've been told that by somebody else. And like we've been focusing in our discussion so far very much on those kind of visual kind of pointers as to whether or not, the colours go together or the metals or the patterns. But then there's also myths that I find surface all the time around sort of materiality or practicality. Like, so for example, sometimes I'll suggest to somebody having wallpaper maybe on a particular wall, and they'll immediately rule it out by saying, oh no, because I've got kids, or, the wallpaper will get damaged, or, I don't want to have to sort of incur the expense of replacing it and I can't touch it up like paint. But again, unless you kind of delve into this conversation further, often people can, not really understand the choice, I guess. And, for example, some wall coverings are actually like a vinyl wall covering, and they're way, way more durable than paint. So an example of that is, on our staircase, actually, about 7 years ago, we put like a Marimekko wall covering. So Marimekko is like, for anybody who doesn't know Marimekko, you'll find it easily online, but, lots of amazing images on social media and everything that people might recognize of like a lot of sort of very abstract kind of floral and foliage type prints. But, people could so easily look at an image and just discount, oh no, I can't have wallpaper in my house. But actually, if you understand that it's a vinyl, you can wipe it, it doesn't rip easily. And then actually, especially on sort of a whole stairs landing wall, it's amazing how much more durable that is versus the paint that can get scuffed, so easily.
Now, a big thing in the past, Audrey, was all about matching. And you had, your settee with your 2 chairs that were all matching in the living room. In my bedroom, when I sort of did it up for the first time as a teenager, I got my curtains that were also matched by the lampshade, and that pattern was repeated on the bedspread. And often we had, curtains, the whole shebang, because my dad sold curtains, and it was all about a matching pelmet matching tie backs and matching. That seems to have sort of gone out a little bit. Is that sort of a rule? Should we match? Should we not? Is it a myth?
Well, yeah, I'm actually pretty allergic to matching, I must admit. So, that's kind of my personal point of view. But what I've noticed over the years is that, I certainly remember exactly what you're describing, the real sort of craze that, a lot of things be matched. I think in our house growing up, we had like a patterned 3-piece suite of furniture in the living room, but then the curtains also matched that. Thankfully, the walls were something different, but everything else was kind of, merging in together. And, over the years, I suppose, traditionally in hotels as well, there would have been quite a lot of sort of, even if they weren't loud patterns, sort of that the same fabric would be used on the curtains and maybe on a throw on the bed and on some cushions and that kind of thing. And then, thankfully, things sort of moved away from that, over the last decade or so in particular, I would say. And I found like an increasing amount of people when I'd speak to them on the phone, new clients, that very first phone call, they'd sort of say, oh, and by the way, I really don't like anything matching. I don't want it to feel like a hotel. So that was that idea of that kind of traditional hotel feel. Now, of course, what's happened even since then is that hotels, especially the more kind of trendy boutique hotels, have completely also moved away from the matching and are now more kind of eclectic and mixing their fabrics and their furniture types and everything, and essentially kind of replicating the trend that evolved in the home, kind of moving away from all the matching. So that's been a great kind of source of delight for me, that, to actually have people initiating that rather than me sort of feeling like I'm trying to move away from the matching myself. Although having said all that, I have noticed recently that there is the beginning of a trend, I think, back towards the matching, unfortunately. So we've been seeing a few images lately on social media from our Prime Minister in particular, the sort of matching wallpaper and sofa in quite bold prints. So I'm not sure if we're
sometimes it nearly reminds me of Where's Wally, and it's all you see there, the wallpaper and the sofa, and it's all the same in the lampshade. You're like, is this a 3D image or what is it?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, so certainly quite busy if it is sort of a big pattern and it's on both, sort of wall and sofa up against it. So yeah, a very kind of specific sort of look and feel, to do that. So yeah, I'm still in the mixing rather than the matching, I would say, from my
I wonder, is that like a nod to cottagecore that's sort of come in since COVID, that nostalgia back to your heavy patterns, the big tapestries. There's something sort of warming about them.
Yeah, I think so. It is really warm and comforting, and it's the complete opposite of sort of opening up the space and being kind of light and airy and minimal. And, it's kind of cocooning the space more when you do that kind of thing. So yeah, it's certainly not, for everybody, but I can see, why people would go down that route. But yeah, at the end of the day, I think, the mixing, you can get, great atmosphere from sort of, mixing things up. But then it is just about, thinking how to do that and not sort of losing confidence and just kind of, not maybe going for certain kind of bolder prints and things because you may feel somebody saying to you, oh gosh, you can only have one pattern in that room. So not to fall down that trap.
I think it's really interesting, and I've never thought about this before, but it's just crossing my mind now. In relation to patterns, when you think about going back in the day when maybe you were furnishing your first home, you were probably very reliant on hand-me-downs from different family members and friends and sort of their cast-off. So all of a sudden you did have a bit of a cobbled together look. So maybe matching was that sort of phase to say I've made it, a bit like in New York. Apparently the bigger the dog, it's the status symbol of the bigger the apartment. So maybe it's sort of a sign of I've made it if it's matching, because I've therefore gone out and bought all of these items, and we got comfortable moving away from that. But then it's the nostalgia of bringing it back. Who knows?
Yeah, absolutely. I do think there's a lot of truth in that. And, I mean, back in the day, the things we're saying, we remember like the matching pelmets and curtains and tiebacks, or the sofas and curtains. I mean, they had to be pretty much custom made to be in the same fabric. So that in itself then, was, I suppose, only accessible to certain people to spend that money.
Yeah. I'm always fascinated by where things come from. If you can sort of figure that out. Yeah. Now, speaking of figuring things out, all of these older houses from back in the day, they have great design in terms of some of the antiques. And there's always a question around, if I've got an old home, do I have to furnish it in an old style? If I've got a new home, can I put in antiques in there, or do I have to use, modern clean lines? And, personally, from my perspective, I sort of like both, Audrey. I love sometimes a busy bedroom that's really comforting and can be really warm. And then I love sort of clean, modern lines, which can just be, uncluttered. So if I had a house in the morning and I wanted to do 2 bedrooms in 2 different styles, could I do that? Or is that a no-no as well?
Well, no, I wouldn't say it's a no-no at all. I think if that's, what you want to do and that's what's going to make you happy, I would say that's the most important thing. But, just like you said, I also love that mix of kind of old and new. I tend to be doing it like probably throughout the property or, in a particular room rather than saying, oh, this is the antique room and this is the modern room. But particularly in bedrooms, if you wanted to really define that style, like different in each one, then, I'd say actually what could be quite a nice idea then is to actually merge those 2 styles in your living areas. So have that mix of maybe some antique pieces of furniture with some more contemporary elements, whether that's furniture items or things like, more contemporary rug or artwork, mirrors on the wall, that kind of thing. And that way you're sort of creating a certain amount of unity between, the differences that are happening in these individual bedrooms and then the more common space that people kind of frequent, outside of those rooms. And at the end of the day, bedrooms, it's not like certainly in my house, it's not like every guest gets to go into every bedroom. So, it is a more private space generally. So, I think to just do something that you really love and if there's 2 different people in 2 different bedrooms and they want a different style in each, then I just think absolutely why hold back on things like that.
And in going back to, I asked 2 questions in one there, but around if you've got a modern house, can you use antique furniture and vice versa?
Yeah. So I am a real believer that you can, and I think you can really achieve great things by doing that. So like we've been talking up till now about kind of mixing things, rather than matching. So I would apply the same sort of way of thinking to the fact that, if it's an old like period property that you live in and you want to bring in sleek modern furniture, that's the mixing rather than saying, oh, it's a Victorian house, I need sort of Victorian furniture and everything needs to be sort of heavy and ornate and detailed, and then the other extreme would be the modern house then that has very clean lines, very simple architecture, no cornicing, no decoration really as part of, the fabric of the building. And then actually to bring in some antique pieces of furniture with that ornamentation and sort of more decorative aspect. But I would say not for every piece in every room to be heavy and decorative, but to bring in a few key pieces that can really stand out and then to mix them with other pieces of furniture that are more simple. Doesn't have to be uber modern, could be some mid-century kind of pieces as well, but just more pared back, more clean lines, and then you allow the more decorative pieces to really stand out.
Well, this has been absolutely fascinating. I think there is so many myths out there that I thought were gospel and that you had to follow, but it shouldn't surprise me that we don't need to be all matching. I was never a big fan of double denim, and I've even seen triple denim, so of course the same should apply. And really around colours, what you think you might be told to go with in terms of blue and green should never be seen. It's really about following what you want, what brings you joy, and how do you use the room? How does it make you happy? If you're making decisions based on that, you can't go far wrong.
If you enjoyed our podcast, we would be delighted if you could rate, review, and subscribe on your favourite podcast provider. This will help others who are seeking home and furnishing advice and inspiration discover the DNA of home interiors. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter at the DNA of Home Interiors.
If you are looking for inspiration and help in designing your home interiors, take a look at Audrey Whelan's masterclasses on audreywhelan.com/events. And don't forget to check out youfurnish.com, a search and comparison website which helps connect people with amazing furniture from over 100 retailers. We designed it to solve the problem we and thousands like us faced furnishing our homes. And now we are really excited that everyone can search, discover, compare and shop for their home, all in one place.
Thank you to our sponsor checkatrade.com for their support in bringing this episode to you. And most importantly, thank you all for listening today.
We hope you can join us next time.